Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steve Pomerantz, Director of Homeland Security Program for GINSA. And I'd like to welcome you all to this, what I predict will be a very interesting and informative webinar. I'm only going to take a couple of minutes to kind of set the table and then turn it over to our guests. As many of you are probably aware, the Homeland Security Program at GINSA started as a direct result of the 9/11 terror attacks in the United States. And the centerpiece of that program for all these subsequent years has been an annual law enforcement trip to Israel for senior law enforcement officers, managers, chiefs, sheriffs, heads of state police organizations, and the occasional federal official. This was all designed really to be for more local law enforcement to see how the Israeli National Police, a police force that unfortunately has had huge amount of experience both in preventing terrorist attacks and responding to them, to see how they do it, so that we can learn some of those lessons and bring them back to the United States. It has been a really excellent program, and I'm not saying that as a person who participates in it. I'm saying that from the point of view of what I've heard from our now more than 300 attendees. We were all set to go on our annual trip in October. When the events of October 7th occurred, we immediately saw an obvious need to postpone. We had no idea at the time when we'd be able to do it. And a few weeks after that, General Dror Avda, the Israel National Police attaché at the embassy here in Washington, to my great surprise, said that the Israel police were anxious to host a delegation. It came as a surprise to me, given everything that they were dealing with at the time. However, as usual, they were anxious to share the lessons they had learned with their brothers and colleagues in law enforcement here in the United States. So we quickly put a group together, much different agenda than what we normally do. And we went with General Avda as our mission leader, in the sense that he had pretty much designed with the Israel National Police this particular agenda specifically for GINSA. I think that's all I need to say. I'm happy to answer questions at the end if they're any directed toward me. I would like General Avda to spend a minute talking about the concept of this particular delegation and why the Israel National Police thought it was important. He is in a place where he cannot use the video, so we'll just have his voice. Dror, you there?
Yes, thank you, Steve. I just want to add that my voice is the better part of my personality, so nobody is missing nothing if he can't see me on video. The goals of this mission was a little bit more unique from the other missions. The missions that we are usually taking is to put a very broad picture of the INP, the Israeli National Police, and we thought that these horrible events presenting a new challenges and lessons that we learned and still learning, that we need to share with our close friends, the American law enforcement people. So we laid down some quick schedule that basically dealing with the events on the South, going to the places, some of the places that was under this attack in the 7th of October, getting a briefing from the generals and and the commanders in the field, and see in first eye what what's happened, then going and meeting with another components of the INP that dealing with all the missile attacks, with the recognizing of the bodies, meeting with the border patrol, and meet some U.S. citizens, border patrol female officer that was killed in the line of duty, and trying to learn from all of these components of the INP what are the first lessons of this terror attack, and what are the things that you can take from this kind of terror attack and learn to your organizations. So this was basically the schedule, and we had the opportunity to see the evidence movie, the horror movies that not all, but a lot of graphic evidence from the actual GoPro of the terrorist was taken. So from my side, it was very important to share it with the participants. And the last observation, we are facing now attacks all over the world that is saying that the Israelis are faking evidence and it's never occurred, and attacks on anti-Semitic ground. So it's also, this is not the main goal of the mission, but from my perspective now, it can add to the credit of the people that understanding and can say, okay, we were witness in the field and saw the things that happened. So that's it from my point of view.
Thank you, Dror. We have with us now today, and you probably saw it on the email, the president of the National Sheriff's Association and the CEO of the same organization. This is I'm sure either one or both might describe it, but just so you understand, so everybody understands, this is one of the premier law enforcement organizations in the United States. There are 3,300 sheriffs, and most in the country, most of them who belong to the national sheriffs. They have a major voice in law enforcement and beyond in this country. So I think Jonathan Thompson, who is the CEO, and honored us with going on this delegation. I'll turn it over to him now. Jonathan.
Thank you, Steve, and Dror. It's very humbling to be asked to be a part of this. I'm going to start out by first saying our prayers every night are for every fallen officer from the Israeli National Police, those that were injured, many severely, and for the more than 1,200 murdered, is the best way to put it, brutally murdered innocent civilians. And I would like to go to something that Dror addressed momentarily ago, and that is that the narrative is appears to be shifting or seeming to try to shift the narrative. And I will tell you that Hamas and the Palestinian people have lost what shred of moral ground they had, because we did see it and we experienced it. We smelled the death. We smelled the destruction. We saw every part of the scale, so to speak. And I want to turn it to our president to talk a little bit about why it was important and what his takeaways were. But I want to also say to those from JNSA, we could not have experienced this without them. To your benefactors, thank you. You have given me an entirely new perspective on not just the risks and dangers, but the totality of hatred, pure, unadulterated, evil-based hatred that the people of Israel have to deal with. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. And then my last point is I served in the Pentagon for almost 7 years during the Iraq War, and have seen my share of destruction and death and harm, and nothing I've ever seen can adequately describe what I did experience. So Sheriff Champagne speaks for the association, but also as an individual sheriff, and I know he's had very similar comments, and I think I'll turn it to him now to give you some of that commentary and truly vision-based experience. Greg?
Thank you, Jonathan, and Steve, and my good friend, General Dror. It's good to hear you. I'm happy I can't see you, but not really. I'm about that. But it is good to hear you again. And I just want to again reiterate my thanks to you and all of GENSA and its supporters for providing these programs over the years. This was my first GENSA program, but it was not my first trip to Israel. I actually have been twice before in the last 12 years to Israel on security type learning missions, obviously never under these kind of circumstances. And I am familiar with the geography of Israel. I have read up since my first trip. I have read and studied a lot about the history of the conflict with the Palestinians, the Gaza, the Oslo Accords. So I was pretty familiar with all of that. You know, how Gaza was essentially turned over to the Fatah back in 2005 or 6, I believe it was, and then Hamas immediately became the elected government, you know, in Gaza when Israel decided to completely pull out. And even I recall watching the videos where Israel was forcefully evicting its own citizens out of settlements there to in attempt to comply with that with those agreements of the time, to give them basically what they wanted in Gaza for sure. I have studied and read up a lot on radical Islam, which I believe is an ongoing and continual threat to the world. It has been for some time. We know that all too well, especially after 9/11. So this opportunity came, and I felt compelled to go, even though I'd been twice. Certainly, I'm having the opportunity again to serve as president of our great association. I'm the first sheriff in modern history to actually recycle and come back and serve twice. I was president back in 2016. I've been a sheriff, elected sheriff in St. Charles Parish, Louisiana, outside of New Orleans for 27 and a half years. I was a prosecutor 14 years before that. So I've been working in law enforcement and the criminal justice system now for, if my math is correct, 42 years. I know I look very young, but I've been doing this for 42 years. I have thought of little else since this recent trip, and especially in light of our see the yet publicly unreleased 44-minute IDF video, which showed the actual live footage of the massacres for 44 minutes. I'm thankful we saw that as one of the very last pieces of the trip because it has had such an impact upon me. I mean, I've prosecuted murder cases, bad murder cases. I've seen deceased bodies. I've seen car crashes over many, many years. Nothing I've seen in our day-to-day law enforcement activities compared or prepared me for what I saw during those 44 minutes. After about 10 minutes of watching it, I recall looking at my watch and realizing that, oh my God, I've got 33 more minutes of this to watch. So let me say that we got to see, obviously, 140 people in the last moments of their lives, the terror on their face, the torment as they were being tormented, tortured, and brutally murdered by savages who were in a state of absolute ecstasy. And every time an individual was killed, they shouted, "God is great." I'm a practicing Roman Catholic my whole life. And I don't know what God they were referring to, but it's certainly not my God, and I know it's not yours. We saw police officers in the Siderat. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. We don't have those single consonants with apostrophes, but Siderat, Siderat. We watched officers whose homes and families were literally a mile or two behind them basically become combat soldiers fighting an invading army with their family close by. We have criminals here in the United States. We have people that shoot at us on occasion, but we don't have invading armies that we have to defend our own homes, literally a mile or two away. And the bravery that we saw, the resilience that we saw from those ordinary police officers who do the same things we do, patrol the streets, keep their community safe, have to essentially become combat soldiers in an instant. I just, God bless them. I have no words for the courage that we saw displayed by those men and women. People in the United States here, I think, cannot fathom the atmosphere that Israelis live under. I downloaded the app of rocket launches that the Tofar, I believe it was Tofar, where these alerts on their phone and literally have anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute to react and get into a safe room before a Hamas or a Hezbollah rocket, which now can reach all parts of the country, come in. I still have it. I still have the alert set. In fact, last night, I don't know if any of you are aware of that, but there were literally dozens of rockets shot last night. I'm amazed that Hamas can still shoot rockets out of Gaza, but they're still doing it. So the message that I take back, again, first is the propaganda war. The radical Islamists have done this before, not just Hamas, but they commit a vicious attack. They then deny that it was vicious, and then the so-called innocent citizens come forward to say that you cannot defend yourself from this, that it's a numbers game. If we killed 1,000 of you, you can only kill 1,000 of us. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way in the world. This was, and then you hear, it boils my blood then to hear them talk about stop the genocide, that the Israeli military is committing genocide. What I saw in that 44-minute video was genocide. That was men, women, defenseless children, infants, dead in their beds, shot. That was genocide. To stop the genociders who literally live next door to you is not genocide. It is self-defense. It is protecting your families and your countrymen from evil that will come back, most assuredly will not stop unless they annihilate Hamas. So I'm certainly all in favor of that, and I believe that's what the Israeli military and government is committed to do. We did hear that commitment from everybody that they will eliminate Hamas. And so the propaganda war is a big issue right now. I'm not sure where that's at. I mean, we're seeing, these protesters come, and I truly believe it's a small minority of people with obviously well-funded, propaganda machine behind them, similar to what we saw with the Black Lives Matter movement, Antifa. It seems like it's the same forces and the same voices who are coming forward with that. Anyway, that propaganda war is something I think Israel needs to continue to consider and combat. The video, the 44-minute video, I would urge that with some editing and blurring faces, I think more of it needs to be shown. And so I'm sorry if I'm rambling a little bit, but then we have a problem here in the United States. And I think most of our citizens believe that something like this could not happen here. We currently are dealing, and the Sheriff's Association is probably one of the most vocal law enforcement organizations, without a doubt, about this, is our unsecured border, where literally 600,000 ways a year are coming into the country. These are people that we have no idea where they're from, what their plans are, how well armed they are, and who they are, what their criminal records are. So that's 1.2 million just in the last 2 years. So if anyone here thinks that an attack by 10 armed individuals, 20 armed individuals with rifles who go into a town and decide one goes into the Walmart, one goes into the strip mall, and so on simultaneously, the havoc and fear that I think they could create is simply enormous. And we're simply not prepared for something like that. So my big fear and my takeaway here is that something like that could happen here because of our situation currently, again, with the border. And I know the police, the Israeli National Police, and Dror and his brothers are rethinking the idea. Many of those officers had to literally engage in combat armed with only handguns. Obviously, those on special response teams had rifles, and thank God for them, because they were able to repel this invading force from penetrating further into the heart of Israel. We have to rethink that in the United States as well, being prepared for not just a criminal or two or some violent incident or a school shooting, but some type of really mass terrorist attack, which I truly believe it's not a matter of if, but when. FBI Director Christopher Wray testified before Congress this morning. I watched him, and to paraphrase him, he said he has never seen so many red flags and so many potential threats present in the United States, in our homeland at this time. He said something to that effect, which should be chilling to everyone. So with that, I think I'll stop. I don't know if you want to do questions or Steve or whatever, but I mean, that's, I keep seeing these visions. I did have some trouble sleeping for a few days, but I'm doing okay now. But the sheer, we came out of it not really being able to put words on it. And unfortunately, the opponents are tending to twist the narrative from one of it was a genocide and attempt at slaughter of Jews to one of your self-defense is now genocide. And I mean, it's just absurd. It's ridiculous. And I pray for you. I pray for the people of Israel. I'm praying for the people of the United States right now, because while Israel may be the little Satan to Hamas and Hezbollah and the other groups, the United States is the big Satan, and we're really the big target. So if Israel's not successful, then it's going to be certainly a problem for us in the United States. It will be anyway, but certainly we're praying, and we offer our full support to the people of Israel. Thanks again, Steve, for the opportunity I didn't mention, we traveled through Be'eri, one of the kibbutzes that get I think they lost 130 citizens, men, women, children, babies in their beds. We saw this. We saw babies without heads in their beds. We saw the blood on the wall from the gunshots. I think, I don't know how many hostages were taken out of Be'eri. We saw the home where Mrs. Vivian Silver, who was a true peace activist for the Palestinians, who actually took Palestinian women to cancer treatments on her own, a true woman of peace, was slain in her home, in her safe room. And they had to identify her body from bits of bone fragments. And this was a true woman of peace that the savages simply had no sympathy for. Another fact I think that's not unknown, that is unknown to many right now, is that about approximately 15,000 Gazans were allowed to go into Israel to work on a daily basis, and that many of those provided intelligence for the attack that we were told. And so that is a very troubling thing as well, that also occurred. They worked in the kibbutz. Who knows, they were able to supply, whether it was fence codes to get into the secured areas. The names, we understand that names of people were called, that the terrorists knew who lived where. So that's especially troubling, that so-called innocent Palestinians provided that type of intelligence and assistance to Hamas. Truly a mini Holocaust that must never be repeated again. All of us came away with full support and offering our prayers and whatever else we can do to speak the message out. And we already have plans to continue to doing so, and to putting together a documentary for the Sheriff's Association with film and video that we took while we were there. I know I rambled on a little bit, Steve, but I'll go ahead and be quiet now and certainly be happy to answer any questions or field any comments anybody has. Thank you.
Hey,
Thanks,
Steve,
Greg.
could I just add one
Yeah, go ahead.
localized perspective? I was asked recently by a national journalist, national outlet, why you felt compelled to do this. And in retrospect, I think it's a very, very simple parallel. We have two cartels in south of our border, Jalisco and others, that are equally committed to the undermining of our country for monetary gain, pure and simple. They are equally brutal, they're equally committed, and they are equally resourced, if not superior, have superior resourcing to law enforcement in this country. When you look at Hamas, their motivations are for power, for brutal force and control, pure and simple. And their methods and means, though, are exactly the same. Exactly the same. They are flooding the zone. They are brutal in their treatment, and they are seeking to own and operate the upper hand, and that we cannot allow to happen. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Jonathan. There's not much to add to the eloquence of both of these gentlemen, to what they said and what we saw. I would just echo and thank them both for what they said. I know I don't know if Greg remembers, I was sitting next to him when we watched that 44-minute video, and we had been, and I think Jonathan was on the other side of me. I sat between them, and we had been given every opportunity not to watch that movie. I knew it. Some people, Dror included, who thought we shouldn't subject ourselves to that. As we walked into the room, after there's certain protocol involved, we were told we could walk out at any time. We could leave no shame, no embarrassment, just walk out. Nobody did, but I know that several of us, myself included, there were times just had to avert my eyes, just couldn't take it anymore. And what Greg said was exactly right. Each minute seemed like 20 watching that. So I just want to say a couple of things, other couple of takeaways that I know they would talk about given more time, and I'll only spend a minute and then I'll open it for questions. But one of the takeaways are, we've all seen for more than a year, the divisions in Israeli society, and all the speculation about where that was going to lead. But it was just amazing to see how they have come together. It does not certainly not mean that necessarily the politics are behind them, but the way they've come together to support each other, to provide for the 250,000 people who are displaced both in the south and in the north. The hotel we stayed at had dedicated about half of its rooms to refugees from the south. They call themselves refugees. They describe themselves that way. They provide lodging. They provide food. They've set up a school in the hotel. They've even set up a synagogue, temporary synagogue in the hotel. Nobody you talk to, nobody we talk to, unless one of the other has a conversation I wasn't aware of, nobody wants this to end in any other way than a total destruction of Hamas. Nobody. They are unified on that, and they are unified on helping each other get through this. And the last thing, which the first day, we had a series of briefings that paved the way for us to be able to understand what we were going to see. And every speaker acknowledged that this was the events of October 7th represent a terrible failure of intelligence analysis, of adequate preparation and even adequate response. It took too long for people to get there. And I'll end it because our delegation was all law enforcement. The heroism of the Israeli National Police and the individual police officers is, as I think Jonathan pointed out, maybe both of you did, extraordinary. They lost 58 officers on the first day of the fighting. We got a description. We will walk through one of the firefights by one of the young police officers who described he and his 3 compatriots standing off a much better armed 10-person contingent of Hamas and ultimately prevailing over them. It was just an incredible story of heroism. The Israel National Police are credited with preventing, I think Greg made a reference to it, the Hamas fighters who were prepared. They were not going to stop at those kibbutzim and Sderot. They had food, ammunition, and they were going to go as far as they could into the heart of Israel. The police stopped them long enough. The IDF arrived, and they didn't get any further. It's a story that needs to be told honestly. And these gentlemen that you just heard from are going to help JINSA tell that story. We have plans when the national sheriffs, I don't want to assume anything that the president and CEO is sitting here, but we've had discussions on how during their big conference in Washington this winter, we can further educate their membership on what happened and what they saw. Questions? Ethan, are you moderating questions? Are you there, Ethan?
Yes, I'm. I am. We have one question, Steve. It's in the Q&A. If you want to read it, or do you want me to read it?
Read it, please.
Israeli police have been credibly accused of a catalog of violations against Palestinian Israel and the occupied territories, including sweeping mass arrests, unlawful force against peaceful protesters, and subjecting detainees to torture. Moreover, Israeli police have been accused of not investigating settler violence, particularly in the West Bank, where 250 Palestinians have been killed this year. A study of settler violence cases between 2005 and 2021 showed 92% were dismissed by the Israeli police and authorities. Many people in the U.S. would argue that American police should not be exchanging tips, notes, and training with the police force that they say is designed to enforce a racist apartheid state. What is your response?
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm going to say something and then turn it over to Dror, who may want to comment. I've been aware of these kinds of allegations and for several years. So let me say that the truth of it is that the nation of Israel has a system of laws and a system of criminal justice and jurisprudence very similar to the United States, which is one of the reasons I take American law enforcement people to Israel. There are other countries that are better at counterterrorism. I'll point to China. You don't hear about many acts of terrorism in China because the moment you're suspected of being a terrorist or terrorist sympathizer, you're arrested, likely executed. Your whole family is rounded up, and nobody ever hears about you again. So that's a very effective policing technique. Only it's not working in either Israel or in the United States. The Israeli police operate under court supervision. They have to get court approval for most everything they do, and they operate under if you believe it or not, the press in Israel is more aggressive rather than less aggressive than ours, and there's a tremendous amount of public scrutiny. That's number one. I am aware of organizations that have produced videos and studies making all kinds of allegations. When I'm asked about them to refute them, it's easy because I don't have to get into substance. All I have to say is, here's what we see in Israel. Here's what our delegations see. Here's what we do. We don't keep it secret. And there's nothing in there that comes anywhere near or even approaches the kind of allegations they make. Now, let me then say also quickly that all of what that question, or the most of what that question referred to, was activities outside the state of Israel proper, inside the West Bank, and of course, there's no more Israeli presence in law enforcement presence or any kind of presence in Gaza. What happens there is totally different. I don't think it, I think the description that I just heard, I would quarrel with, but I really don't have to, because the Israel police do not play much of a role in Judea and Samaria. And I think maybe, Dror, do you want to say something to that?
Yes. First of all, I want to mention that this kind of question is just taking the things and evidence that our colleagues just share with the people to a place that it's, a place that you want to quarrel, not with the evidence, just to make some very large accusation. I really don't know any other apartheid country that we have that have such much minorities inside the government and judicial system and inside the police and all of these systems. But this is not the issue. The main issue that we are basically focusing, taking people to see the INP inside the Israeli borders, that I convinced that most of the people that hearing this webinar don't have an issue with the existence of the Strait of Israel, or other that if they're shouting from the river to the sea. So if we are focusing only in these trips, and the aim of this trip, we took this group and other groups to see the INP operating inside the Israeli UN borders and the borders that acknowledged by all of the world. And this is the first thing. The second item that, the almost, or all the numbers that are coming from this kind of question is really don't accurate and not true. But this is not the issue. We can have another webinar. I can answer about these things, but this is not the issue.
Steve, can I make one quick point?
Please.
Again, this is an area I'm familiar with, and I think I can kind of boil that question down to the following answer. I've chaired our legal affairs committee as well, being an attorney, and we're constantly dealing with all the constitutional issues that, we train on, excessive force, using reasonable force, search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment, Sixth Amendment, all the rights contained in the Bill of Rights that citizens enjoy in the United States as individual rights. We know what they are. We understand them. Never once on any of the three trips that I've been, and of course, 2 of those were not GENSA, was there ever any discussion about, hey guys, let us tell you how to get around the Constitution and brutalize people? None, never, ever happened. We understand what the rules are. We have gone there, and what we've heard is, here are the conditions we live under. Here are the threats that we face on a daily basis. So that kind of statement is simply, in my opinion, an effort at silencing GENSA, at silencing voices of reason to be able to understand the daily threats that Israelis face. It's a red herring.
Thank you.
And Steve, I just want to add a little bit of context too. First of all, I appreciate the question, but I reject its premise. To what Sheriff Champagne just said about exchanging tips, practices, notes, etc. I think it's a good thing for civilized countries to put their experts together to understand lived situations and scenarios. And remembering too that because we're humans, we lack perfection. There are incidents, and I don't think anybody, and I certainly wouldn't expect Dror to disagree with this. There are incidents of officers or agencies not meeting standards, not meeting up to the expectations. But I want to tell you that those are infinitesimally small as a proportion of our respective countries and the respective roles of law enforcement. And for anyone that does ask that type of question, outside of the context that we're talking about today, the reason I reject it is because of something I said earlier. Hamas has lost any shred of moral ground to speak truth or to respond to truth. They can't. There is no fathomable way, based upon what they did on October 7th and subsequently, to even bring a shred of credibility to that. Let me add one last thing. If you've watched the UN in the last 2 weeks or 2 months even, they have been noticeably silent, purposely silent on these types of scenarios. But yet they have also been silent on the degradation of the women and children in Israel. They have been silent on the heinous actions that it lends even less or more, depending upon how you want to address this, but it lessens the overall ability to raise these types of legitimate questions with any level of credibility in my book.
Thanks, Jonathan. Ethan, any other questions?
The other question is, anyone speaking to the U.S. administration about the implication for U.S.?
Say that again, please.
Anyone speaking to the U.S. administration about the implications for U.S.?
Jonathan?
I'm glad you asked that. It's a great question. Yes, we are. And I'm going to turn it to Sheriff Champagne in a moment to share a little bit about what we're thinking of doing here and working hopefully with GINSA to get it done. But last week I was participated in a DHS forum inside the government, and we raised this point very, very clearly, that the sheer numbers of coming across our border lend a very dangerous, very troublesome, and very high risk scenario of this type of effort being planned with the precision and with the secrecy, the level of secrecy that was carried out in Palestinian territories is shocking. Yes, we are talking to them, and we will continue to do so. We think it's important, and we do have a number of things underway, and one of them Sheriff Champagne alluded to a moment ago about how do we take that message out. Sheriff?
Yeah, in fact, we had a meeting yesterday, and I think, Steve was involved in that as well. So we're putting together our videos and the interviews of the 3 sheriffs, who, by the way, are all executive officers of the National Sheriff's Association. And we want to put together, essentially, our goal is a 15 to 20-minute documentary, going back and forth between interviews, action photos of the attack. And so we and there was another meeting on that today. So we're looking to try to get that done. It does take a little time, the editing and putting all that stuff together. But that's one of our goals to certainly do that.
Ethan? Thanks, Greg. Ethan?
Last question is, how many members of U.S. law enforcement were on this recent trip to Israel?
5 or I think there were 5 of us, not counting me or Dror. I think there were 5. Now that was a smaller delegation than we normally take for a number of reasons. Whenever you plan on something with active law enforcement people, especially at the senior level, you never know what's going to happen at the last minute. So unfortunately, in this particular trip, we had 2 senior municipal police departments had to drop out because of what was going on in their jurisdictions. And even probably more than that was the speed which this all came together. These are busy people, and it's very hard to for them to accommodate near changes in their calendars. I was very, very grateful, and I'm saying this even though they're the two on the line here on the webinar for these two individuals who, as you can see, have major roles to play, that they were able to come with us. Without promising anything, I want to say that we JINSA hope to put together another delegation like this in the near future, hopefully toward the end of January. That gives us a little bit more time to try to assemble a larger group. Couldn't be a better group, but it could have been a larger group. Ethan, anything else?
Steve, can I just want to add something to those that are on the call and watching us. Thank you for taking the time. I would urge you to reach out to your chiefs and your sheriffs and talk to them about what you heard, and encourage them to somehow get involved and seek to get more involved in this program and being a part of it, because too often we at the national level, at the association, we lose sight of that, Forrest, and it's vitally important for you to share with your sheriff or your chief, or even the rank and file, for that matter, of the agencies that you come in contact with. Share with them and encourage them to be more engaged with these types of exchanges, because I think it kind of goes back to that earlier question, that it's how you become a better officer or deputy, you become a better leader, you become a better chief, you become a better sheriff. So I would urge you to do so.
Thanks, Jonathan. Ethan?
Sorry, I was muted.
Anything else?
From the same person who asked the last question, who were the other two members of law enforcement who were there?
We had the chief of police from Rockville, Maryland, and the sheriff from Ocean County, New Jersey. By the way, and the sheriff from the county, Collin County, Texas, which is in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And I'm glad you asked that question, because part of the equation, obviously the two gentlemen we have on here occupy national positions. So that was easy. But part of the equation was to try to get people who have large Jewish populations in their jurisdiction. Because we know right now as we speak, and probably going to get worse, I hate to say, there's a huge amount of fear in the Jewish community. It's palpable. Fear, and unfortunately, I believe somewhat justified, especially given what the Director Wray said today. So to sensitize in a way, and I have found this over the years doing this program, it sensitizes, if that's the best word I can find, these law enforcement executives to the concerns of their Jewish communities. And very often, I have found that when they come back, they reach out to their Jewish communities. And I find that to be a very, very healthy and useful thing. And if that was true in the past, it is now. And that will explain to you why we took the sheriff from Ocean County, New Jersey. I admit to being embarrassed when I found out that the largest yeshiva in the world outside of Israel is in Ocean County, New Jersey. It's a very large Orthodox population, and the sheriff has excellent relationships with them. And I thought this was an experience that he would value and that they would value. And it turned out we were right about that. Long answer to a short question. Ethan?
We have one more question if there's time, Steve. What is the objective of the presentation you're currently working on? What do you want the government to do?
I'd say first that the goal of our presentation, number one, is to get the message of what we saw and what we understand, first off, to the sheriffs of America. And so our hope is to be able to unveil this at our winter meeting, which will be in early February. We've also invited representatives of, I believe, Dror and the Border Guard, Joni and Mickey. Actually, Mickey did an excellent presentation unveiling the sequence and chronology of events of October 7th. And we're hopeful to get them in and so this could give us the opportunity, number one, to get this message to a large number of sheriffs, thereby disseminating it around the country. And hopefully dispel some of the false propaganda, for lack of better
Yeah.
words.
Yeah, that's exactly, that's part of it. And then also to educate sheriffs on how do we go forward? Because what we're seeing is there's now an increasingly blurring of lines of law enforcement responsibilities over security and national security in this country. The fact is that if you have, for example, this is a hypothetical, but if you have a nuclear power plant in your jurisdiction, an incident that seeks to destroy, harm, or do serious damage has national security ramifications critically. Well, the first people that are going to be there are local law enforcement, not state police. That will take time. And what we see and what we learned and what lessons that will be learned need to be conveyed to our sheriffs and their deputies and to law enforcement writ large from this undertaking. Because as Sheriff Champagne said, they were local law enforcement or the national police were oftentimes for 8, 9, 10, even 12 hours, the sole response mechanism until either Israeli border police could engage or they themselves might have been the sole response. So that's the second. And then the third subsequent message that we hope to achieve for the government, for our government, is that they need to recalibrate how they fund the grants to state and local law enforcement in this country, because it's antiquated, number one. Number two, the objectives are in our estimation are out of balance. We need to seriously rethink what the grant program for state and local looks like and how it's measured, and also most importantly how it's continued.
Thanks, Jonathan. Ethan, we just about out of time?
Yes, but we also I don't think we have any more questions.
Well, perfect. Thank you all for joining this, and especially have to thank the three of our presenters. It was as I'm sure you all realize from this, was a very unique, if that's the word I would use, I guess, very unique experience, and shared it with these people. Couldn't have been more honored to do that, or more pleased with the way it worked out. So thank you all. That's it.
Thank you all. God bless Israel.
Thank you very much. Very humbled by this.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you all. It was very inspiring and good to see and hear all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dror, for what you do.